everyone. I am Ginny. I'm head of brand creative at Dishoom, and very happy to be chatting to you all today. So, I attended a course recently and listened to an incredibly inspiring, intelligent, amazing woman called Maz Farelli give a talk. She was brilliant. She was every kind of superlative that you can possibly imagine. And she gave some advice, which was essentially, in life and in everything that you do, don't be a dullard. So I'm going to do everything that I can to channel Maz and hopefully share some interesting tidbits with you all about how we do design through storytelling at Dishoom. Now, for anyone that hasn't been, a very, very quick summary about Dishoom is we're a group of Indian restaurants. We do black dal, we do bacon naans, and it's all wrapped up in some delicious Bombay storytelling told through lovely, pretty restaurants. It's a very quick summary, which I'll probably get told off for after this, but I'm the one wearing the headset at the moment. Now, given that we have only a very short amount of time together this afternoon, I'm going to kick off by introducing you to a very simple principle that we have at Dishoom. And that is, for something to truly succeed, it must have a little poetry at the heart of it. So the father of one of the co-founders of Dishoom said this, and you're probably thinking, well, isn't that lovely, but what does that mean in the context of designing spaces, or in our context of designing Indian restaurants? For us, it means that in everything that we do, we try to find poetry in things, and then share this with our guests, whether that's through our restaurants, through delivery, or through our store. Our motivation doesn't start with, how can we make a buck out of this? Our motivation is to move people, to make them feel something. And we believe that to do that, you have to find poetry. You have to show soul, character, and depth. Now, I'm aware that's probably going to sound ridiculous to any wise business minds out there, but I believe it's my job and the job of all marketeers to be a bit ridiculous. So hopefully I can go on to explain how we go about imbuing our world with poetry. So firstly, what's our inspiration? Well, we think of every Dishoom as a love letter to Bombay. Its food, its culture, its people, its rich history, and its endless eccentricities. Every one of our cafes is full to the brim of Bombay culture that we get excited about. Our founders spent a lot of time growing up there, going to visit their grandparents, and they have a deep nostalgia and love for the city. They have memories of evenings snacking on bhel at chowpatty, biting into street-side vada pav, sipping chai at Kayani & Co. Preserving the heritage and the memories of the city is our way of sharing our love for Bombay. A huge part of Bombay's heritage are their Irani cafes. These were lovely old spaces that broke down barriers. Immigrants from Iran came to Bombay to escape religious persecution in the early 20th century and set up these cafes. They became places that everyone could come to, regardless of your culture, your class, your religion. Everyone could eat out together for the first time. Now, sadly, their numbers are declining, and their proprietors, such as the brilliant, charming, effusive Mr. Kohinoor, who used to run Britannia & Co., they're passing away. And their kids don't want to take over the cafes. So sadly, more modern establishments like Cafe Coffee Day are becoming the choice for teenage dates. Sadly, these cafes are becoming bittersweet memories. But these lovely pieces of heritage are beautiful. We feel they need celebration and preservation, and that's a big part of what we do. Now, how we do that is through something called the Dharma. So if Shamal, who's one of our co-founders, was here, he would make you all close your eyes, and he'd read this out loud in a dreamy, wistful tone. But I'm not going to do that because that's his party trick. Mine is doing the worm, which I don't feel is appropriate in this context. But what I can tell you is more about the Dharma. So the Dharma is something fundamental that defines us. It's our higher sense of purpose. It's our reason for being. It's about who we are and why we do what we do. Now, we wrote this over a decade ago, and it hasn't changed in all that time. It still stands exactly as it is. Now, for me and my team, who look after the creative execution of bringing to life our world, It tells us that every single piece of design or creative must exist with the intention of welcoming guests and team into our world with warmth and kindness, of delivering the best possible experience, of making connections deeper, experiences richer, and of making everyone feel like they're amongst friends. This is the root of everything for us. It all starts with the Dharma. This is essentially our culture. So, action. What has the Dharma helped us achieve? We've been going 14 years, we have 12 restaurants, 13 delivery kitchens, we serve 100,000 guests a week, we have nearly 2,000 team members, we've donated 21 million meals to hungry children, and we're in the top 10 companies to work for in the UK. So the Dharma has helped us and guided us a lot throughout our business period. And as I said, it's our culture, it's our why, and it's our foundation. But commonly, what can happen as a business grows is its culture can become diluted, which leads me to my second principle, which is deepen, don't dilute. So as a brand and a business, we want to completely break the perceived link between an increase in size and a dilution of quality. So we use strong culture, our Dharma, and rigorous processes to increase the quality of the Dishoom experience as we grow. Now, part of our process is storytelling. So we place Bombay at the heart of our design narrative and tie everything that we do back to this beautiful city. It's in this way that we believe design can be story. So when we create a Dishoom restaurant, we always imagine it as an Irani café deeply rooted in some aspect of Bombay history, a setting that gives context and coherence to the connections between Bombay and the new neighborhood in which we find ourselves. In Carnaby, the setting was Bombay's rock and roll scene, which flared up briefly in the late 1960s. In King's Cross, the setting is a notional go-down behind Victoria Terminus, and we have the independence movement as a backdrop. We then sit down and write a story, a different founding myth for every Dishoom. The interiors, the artwork, the tableware, the music of each restaurant is then conceived in connection to an imagined main character. Every single one of them has their own individual raison d'etre. Every single aspect of the design is then informed by this story. We spend weeks and months researching the Bombay of the era. We talk to people who have memories of the period. We comb the city for the right antique furniture. We mine archives, museums, libraries. We find ourselves in derelict warehouses, railway offices, old cinemas, wherever the story might take us. We then build our world, our version of Bombay, into the walls of our restaurants. Every color, typeface, expression, and interior detail is drawn from this research. This is design as storytelling. And we don't always stop there. So our research has led us to release albums. When we began thinking about Dishoom Carnaby, we discovered that Bombay had this awesome rock scene in the 50s and the 60s. So kids in India who had listened to the Beatles and the Stones, they were picking up guitars and they were jamming. As the project evolved and our research went deeper, we felt that an album would be an amazing way to share some of the music. So we found some of the original musicians, I don't even know how we went about that now, brought them to London, and in November 2015, we released Slip Disc, Dishoom's Bombay London Grooves, on LP and CD. Now, Dishoom Carnaby as a space is the documentation of this rock scene and all the people who were around at the time. For the story, we invented the character of an Irani from Bombay who comes to London in the 60s. He comes to study something like accounting or law, but this is London and it's the 60s, so he becomes a songwriter and he's tripping at sunrise on Primrose Hill, he's dancing at the ad-lib next to David Bailey and Gene Shrimpton. But we find him with a telegram in his pocket. It's sort of a palm print of sadness on his chest. It's from his sister and his mother, asking him to come back to India because his father has died. Now he goes back, and we imagine that our restaurant on Kingly Street is the one that he would have built when he goes back. So design-wise, we literally channeled our protagonist's likes and dislikes, his taste in music, his political views. We made a point of having a why for the design choices throughout the restaurant. We've also been known to put on an immersive Indian noir, which we have someone who helped us do that in the crowd. Okay, so what even is that? What is an immersive Indian noir? Well, when we launched our place in Kensington, we did it not just as a restaurant, but as an immersive theatre production. The story centres around a guy called Cyrus Irani, and it's set in 1949. Cyrus has a dubious past. He's a good guy. Who cares? But he's just come out of prison. He's got some money, and he buys an old cinema and turns it into a jazz club cum restaurant. So our guests became his guests, joining him on the opening night of his restaurant. In this instance, we literally invited guests into our story. They became characters immersed in our time period and our interpretation of what a 1940s Art Deco and jazz-fueled Bombay would look like. So Dishoom Covent Garden was our original. This is the first restaurant we opened back in 2010. This was quite a long time before we really realized the strength and the opportunities that came with approaching design through storytelling. 10 years later, we had a chance for a redesign and a bit of a do-over. So naturally, we looked at our locale and were inspired by Covent Garden's heritage as a landmark for theatre and the performing arts. So we told the story of Bombay's theatrical journey from Parsi theatre to silent film to the talkies era. We dreamt up two leading ladies, Yasmin and Ruby, who were actresses, and they swung from chandeliers, jumped off cliffs, and fought atop speeding trains. Our protagonists were interesting, independent, passionate, and bold, so the space needed to reflect that. It needed to be a space that our leading ladies would feel proud to call their own. So our story took us to old theatres in Bombay, old cinemas, we mined old Bollywood star archives, and we read countless books on Parsi theatre. My eBay and Amazon purchasing history are wild because of my job. Now, Dishoom Canary Wharf. This restaurant's founding myth is based in 1970s South Bombay, in a café imagined to be next to the Bombay Stock Exchange. And with the story, our protagonist is fundamentally a good guy, but he makes some bad calls and ends up masterminding a bit of a Ponzi scheme, which isn't great. But he was blinded by the promise of profit, and he just wanted to be part of this fast and glitzy scene in which financiers mixed with industrialists and with Bollywood stars. So this was the world that we needed to recreate for our guests. A reimagined 1970s Bombay with funky murals, textured upholstery, collectible artwork, a glitzy space where our protagonist would feel proud to host his high society friends. So for this cafe, we physically brought the story to life by printing it on the restaurant hoarding. We used it as a design device, not just as design inspiration. This is the last example I'm going to give you, I promise. So Dishoom Battersea is our latest opening, and this is our retro future cafe, which is a bit wild. So this whimsical story is of a girl in Bombay in 1953, transported to an imagined 2023, where she becomes the superhero Choti Dishoom. So in this time, we wrote the story as the first pages of a comic set in the actual restaurant. You might say, this feels a touch too far. You don't have any business designing a retro future imagined from a 1950s Bombay with the story of a girl superhero. But I genuinely think this is one of the most beautiful and creative restaurants that we've built yet. It's got flowing sci-fi curves, beautiful colors, and the team did this while I was on maternity leave, so I'm really happy for them, if not a bit jealous that they got to play in this stunning design realm. So before I finish, I want to return us back to this notion of deepen, don't dilute. So this exercise that we do, where every Dishoom starts with a story, means that every Dishoom has a start-from-scratch approach. Every Dishoom is set in a different imagined world and steeped in its own narrative. It means that every Dishoom has a completely newly designed graphic identity. There's no fixed logo. Each site has its own unique bar menu. Hoarding designs are different every time, and artwork is always uniquely sourced. Each site has its own 50-page artwork and design guide, which documents the name and backstory of every person in every photograph, illustration, advert on the walls. Every door handle, floor tile, poster, and piece of signage is shown next to the Bombay original which inspired it. Each site also has its own Matka token, uniquely designed to suit the story. This is a bit tangential, but Matka is essentially our in-house game of chance. So if you have one of these tokens, you can come into our restaurant, you get a roll of the dice. If you roll a 6, your table's meal is on us. So it's our version of a discount, but just it felt a bit more generous to be giving stuff away. Now, there are plenty of times when we ask ourselves, does anyone even notice? Does anyone even care that we are writing these stories, that there is no one logo? Why do we go to such extreme lengths? And possibly the majority of people don't notice. And you could say we should just limit ourselves to looking after people really well, serving them decent food and drink in pleasant surroundings. And that is a good business model. But some people do notice. And we believe that this process makes the experience of our restaurants better. By placing Bombay and the city's stories at the heart of our design, we're able to create entirely unique emotional and sensory experiences with every new Dishoom, which leave our guests feeling enriched. We find the poetry and we nurture it to put a smile on our guests' faces. So if I can leave you with 3 takeaways, they would be: find your poetry, find what gives you joy, and then show that to your guests and all your customers. Secondly, as a brand gets bigger, you have to deepen and not dilute the quality of what you do. And finally, don't be a dullard. Thank you very much for being such kind listeners.